On today's podcast, we're talking about the mindset and the tipping point when leaders and groups of humans decide to enter into cultures of accountability with each other and for a mission greater than themselves, or dip into patterns of diffusing the responsibility to someone else and the culture then suffers.
Welcome back to the Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world.
Hey everyone, it's Jason, and welcome back to the Thermostat Podcast, wherever you are and however you're coming to the podcast today. Welcome back. So glad you are here. If you are new to the podcast, welcome in. We have many new listeners, folks that are joining this podcast from all over the place. So welcome in to you all. So glad you're here and hope you will go back, check out old episodes that we have. So many great topics, thought leaders that have joined me on this podcast, so many great episodes. I really hope you'll go back and jump in, dive into this. For those of you that have been with us from the very beginning, welcome back. So glad this continues to add value and contribute to your life and work. My commitment to you, as always, is this will be a place for you to step back, to breathe, and to think about the temperature that you're trying to set in your life and your work with the people around you. And my hope that this time is valuable and gives you some things to step back, to think about, and to calibrate your own thermostat. We are rounding out the end of season 7. We have more, well over 200 episodes now. So much great stuff. And I'm just so grateful and thankful for the listeners. Hopefully you heard that on the Thanksgiving podcast that I did recently. But anyway, before we dive into today's topic, if you'll do me the quick favor, as always, rate the podcast 5 stars. If you aren't already subscribing, please subscribe. But then rate the podcast 5 stars and leave a review in your own words. Those are the 2 ways the algorithms work the best and help other people find the podcast. And of course, anybody who shares topics or episodes that really resonate with you, with friends, colleagues, team members, those are the ways that it obviously spreads as well. So thanks to everybody that takes the time to do that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Accountability is not a one-way street. Accountability is not a one-way street. We often hear leaders and across organizations say, quote, "I'm going to hold you accountable. I'm going to hold you accountable." And I understand the idea, and also, believe me, there is a time and a place for that phrase. However, when we only talk about accountability in these ways, in this "I'm going to hold you accountable," it starts to paint the image that accountability is a one-way street. You are accountable to me. The reality is we are accountable to each other. It's a two-way street. We are accountable to the relationship we have committed to together, whatever that might look like. On our teams, we are accountable to each other to support each other for the goals and mission we have identified. As a leader, the team member isn't just accountable to you, you are accountable to them. When we create cultures of two-way street accountability with each other and throughout our team ecosystem, magical progress can occur. And when we dip into what I would call diffusion of responsibility to someone else, or making accountability a one-way street, the culture and our performance struggles. So, on today's podcast, we're talking about the mindset and the tipping point when leaders and groups of humans decide to enter into cultures of accountability with each other and for a mission greater than themselves, or dip into patterns of diffusing the responsibility to someone else, and the culture then suffers. But before we dive into today's topic, let's pause for a quick break and we'll be right back.
Many teams and organizations right now are realizing that they need to do both. They need to engage the minds and hearts of their people in person, where everyone in the room can experience the energy of congregating together and find clarity for the road ahead. And they also need to continue to find ways to engage the minds and hearts of their people virtually, with those who are working remotely or at a distance. So, if you are in the process of planning your next team meeting, company all-hands event, conference, or culture summit, and are looking for support with a powerful keynote speech, facilitated team conversations that are the currency for change, or deeper development on leadership mindset and an intentional strategy for the culture you're trying to create, I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon. I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon.
There is a tipping point within all cultures and with all leaders, and with every person in your cultural ecosystem. They all play a role in tipping the mindset of your culture in one direction or another. We know that culture is shaped by the way we think, act, and interact moment by moment every single day. The culture is dynamic, which means it's proactively being shaped in that moment by the way we think, act, and interact. And all of us within that ecosystem play a role and can tip the culture in a particular direction by the way we choose to think, our mindset as we approach things, and then our actions and interactions that follow. The thinking, acting, and interacting within a culture becomes contagious in a good direction, or it can also become toxic in a bad direction. And over time, it becomes, quote unquote, the way we do it, either in a good way or, again, in that toxic kind of bad way. So let me give an example, and one that is outside of just corporate examples or team examples. Let me just give you a human example. In the 1980s and 90s, there were some neighborhoods in East New York, in Eastern New York neighborhoods within New York City, the wide area of New York City, where some of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the United States existed. At sundown, people didn't want to walk the streets in these neighborhoods. This is in the 80s and 90s in these, eastern part of these downtown New York neighborhoods. People didn't want to walk the streets. Kids they wouldn't let kids ride bikes at certain times during the day. Drugs, gangs, violence was rampant. And in 1992, just to give you an example, in 1992 in these areas, there were 2,154 murders in these areas of New York City, and 626,182 serious crimes in New York City. I love this example, and in fact, Malcolm Gladwell in his book Tipping Point talks about this neighborhood and the research and studies around this neighborhood and this reality. So in these neighborhoods, violence and drugs and serious crimes and murders were rampant during this time. And in psychology, there are a couple of terms that were at play where this was going on, because all of a sudden, in the midst of a 5-year period, something changed in these neighborhoods. And so the psychology terms that I want to introduce is, one, the diffusion of responsibility. That's a psychology term that talks about the mindset that we bring when something is happening and we see something around us that is occurring, that we diffuse the responsibility to somebody else. We recognize that there's an opportunity to help or step in or do something, but yet our mindset in our psychology is that some people then diffuse the responsibility, which means they assume somebody else will step in or do something. It's for somebody else to do, not for me. And what was happening in the midst of this 5-year period around these neighborhoods, something changed. Within 5 years, murders dropped by 64% and total crimes by 50%. In just 5 years, again, those areas from 1992 to 1997, in 1992, when there were 2,154 murders and over 600,000 serious crimes, in just a 5-year period, murders dropped by 64% and total crimes by 50%. And so obviously the research and all the people started to ask the question of, well, what happened? How did the culture change? What was the tipping point of that? And there were certainly many factors, police and drug crackdown, all kinds of different initiatives that happened in the area. But one of the things that they found is that, again, back to this psychology term, is that there was in the past where there was this diffusion of responsibility, and what another psychology term, what others would refer to as the bystander effect, where people saw bad things happening in the neighborhoods, muggings that were taking place, violence, broken windows, graffiti, all these things in the areas, and yet they took on the mindset of diffusing the responsibility to somebody else. And so the bystander effect is somebody sees something happening, but they just assume that somebody else will step in. And so a mugging's taking place. There's all these people that are bystanding and watching it happen. And the mindset they bring is somebody else will intervene, somebody else will take action, and so they let themselves off the hook that they don't have to do anything. And so what they found as they started to dive into this research as to how did these neighborhoods and how did these statistics change so rapidly, they found that one of the tipping points was that the people in the neighborhoods stopped diffusing the responsibility to other people, and they began to engage with each other. They began to make their thinking, acting, and interacting about how can we be a part of not diffusing responsibility, but taking individual and collective responsibility to find solutions. They started to form groups to clean up the neighborhoods. When they saw something happening, they would take action rather than waiting for somebody to happen. They'd call the police. When they heard something, they said something. Small group behaviors that started with individuals changing and tipping their mindset to say, I'm not going to diffuse responsibility, but I'm going to be a part of the solution, started to become contagious and started to rally people around this positive change. And all of a sudden, over the course of those 5 years, they stopped diffusing the responsibility, and they started taking individual and collective responsibility for the outcomes. We know that in toxic cultures and toxic relationships and teams, there's an abundance of diffusion of responsibility. The habits that we form, in the midst of toxic and unhealthy relationships, and this diffusion of responsibility kind of cultures, the habits we form become pointing the finger at somebody else or blaming someone else or pushing off the responsibility for action onto another person. These types of leaders, teams, and cultures become poisoned by this diffusion of responsibility and typically then cling to the status quo and push people further away from each other. Bad habits and dysfunctional operations continue then to linger. And as you know, and I've talked about in other episodes, what we allow lingers and what we teach triggers. And so in culture shaping, the bad habits, the dysfunctional operations, those habits that we allow to linger become these dysfunctional habits that kind of linger and fester throughout the culture. But what we also know that in teams and organizations and within leaders where the oxygen that they're breathing is good, is positive, is caring, is committed to progress. And again, when I say positive, it doesn't mean that we're just ignoring the realities or the challenges we're facing, but we're actually identifying what are those opportunities? What are those things that I need to take more individual or collective responsibility in? In these kind of positive, caring, and committed, cultures that are committed to progress, their thinking, acting, and interacting sees their individual and collective responsibility to each other. It's a two-way street, and the future culture they are building together. So in these healthy cultures, accountability is not a one-way street. You don't just hear the leaders blindly say, I'm going to quote unquote hold you accountable, without acknowledging the ways in which they, as the leader, are also accountable to progress or a better solution. You are accountable to me, and I am accountable to you. The reality is we are accountable to each other. It's a two-way street. We are accountable to the relationship we have committed to together, whatever that may look like. And on our teams, we are accountable to each other to support each other for the goals and mission that we have identified. And as a leader, the team member isn't just accountable to you, you are accountable, of course, to them. And when we create cultures of two-way street accountability with each other and throughout our team ecosystem, magical progress can occur. And when we dip into that diffusion of responsibility to someone else or making accountability that one-way street, we know that the culture and our performance struggles. So, the tipping point within every culture is when the thinking, acting, and interacting shifts from a diffusion of responsibility culture to a culture of accountability. A two-way street where everyone within the culture takes individual and collective responsibility in the outcomes and how they show up to do the work together. Leaders who understand this and teams and organizations that are committed to helping this be the oxygen that people breathe, not only because it's the right thing to do, but because we know that it helps our performance expand. These are the leaders and teams and organizations that realize that they need to be continuously in the business of helping breathe good oxygen into their people and help create cultures of accountability individually and collectively with each other. So, some questions to ponder for this week and some questions for you to reflect on. What are you and others in your life and work? Where are examples of where you might be diffusing the responsibility to others? All of us are human. All of us aren't perfect. So where are those ways in which you might be diffusing the responsibility to others? Where are the opportunities to take greater individual or collective responsibility? And how can you help promote a culture of two-way accountability within your teams and your life and work? I hope this episode has resonated with you. I hope it's been a way for you to calibrate your own personal thermostat and to think about the oxygen that you want to breathe. I hope this episode has resonated, and I hope you'll go back and check out other. And as always, if there's a way in which we can, a topic that you want to hear more about or that you want to dive deeper into, I hope you'll reach out and contact us, info@jasonvbarger.com, info@jasonvbarger.com. Remember, the best leaders, teams, and cultures on the planet stimulate progress by recalibrating their thermostat together and then breathing good oxygen into each other and into the cultural ecosystem that they are creating. Step back, remember, be a thermostat, and breathe good oxygen.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, We are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.